Good afternoon. This is Dr. Matthew Dunn, host of The Future of Email Marketing. And my guest today is Stu Swineford from Relish Studio. Stu, our first time to talk. Welcome and thanks for making the time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you this afternoon and
You're
seeing
in,
what kind of fun stuff we can talk about.
are you up high in Colorado somewhere?
I am. I live at 9,000 feet
Yeah.
west of Denver, kind of west of Boulder area. We've lived up here since '93, um, partially because we love it, because it's an amazing place to be, even in the winters. I'm a Colorado kid
Yeah.
at heart, and then also because we're too lazy to move. So there you go.
You're in Netherlands, is that where you are?
Netherland area. Yeah, Netherland's about 8 miles north of where I live. I'm
Okay.
about halfway in between Black Hawk and Netherland, actually.
Okay, so we're going to go off the rails right from the very beginning. I'm a Colorado kid as well, although I'm in Washington State now. Have you ever been through Saguache?
Oh yeah. So I grew up in Gunnison. Saguache
Really?
is just
Up and
about an
over.
hour and 15 minutes, I think, from Gunnison.
Yeah.
I don't go there a lot, but I've
Why
definitely
would
been
you?
there.
Why would you? But still, is the Netherland area, I mean, since '93, drier, hotter, more fires, all of the dire stuff?
Oh, in terms of recent developments, yeah, I think we're all sort of experiencing that climate change challenge that
Yeah,
we're seeing globally. You said you were in the Pacific Northwest.
yeah,
I mean, it got
Bellingham.
up to 116 degrees.
It got
That's just
105.
obscene.
We're up here in the great big trees, and it was 105 degrees. Like
Yeah,
just a jaw dropping experience, and
yeah,
hopefully it wake
yeah.
us all. Yeah.
So we're seeing that. Last year was particularly bad in terms of fires. Kind of in our area, there was a pretty decent sized one burning near Boulder, and then another one sparked up just north of us. Probably 15 miles as a crow flies north of us, but still, I had some friends that were affected by that one. And then we had, three really major ones burning to the north and west of this area. So it was really smoky, and
Yeah.
they shut down the forest at one point, where you weren't allowed to go into the forest anymore because they just didn't have the capacity of firefighters to
Yeah.
to combat anything new.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was an interesting summer. We're hoping it's been a little wetter this year, so
Yeah.
we're hoping that things continue in that vein.
Oh yeah, I hope so. I hope so as well. And we could probably start. We could probably spend the hour easily talking just about the macro issues facing us, but day jobs and stuff like that. Hey, fill me in a bit on Relish Studio, and you mentioned nonprofits when we were talking a bit beforehand, but broad strokes, focus for the agency and kind of stuff you like doing with them.
Yeah, so Relish is a digital marketing agency. We've been around since the mid to what, however you say that. We were actually kind of founded, at least my involvement came about in 2008.
Okay.
It was an existing agency. I had an agency of my own, and we kind of rolled them together at
Okay.
the time. We liked the Relish name better than than the one that I was using, so we kept Relish. And through the course of our tenure here, we've primarily been focused on kind of website design and development. So
Hmm.
really focusing in that digital realm.
Hmm.
We still do some print work here and there. I started out as a print guy, but we primarily focus on digital marketing efforts and really helping to create conversion focused opportunities for clients.
Right.
Really making sure that investment that they're making in their marketing and in their website is creating a return. Um, and primarily WordPress design and development work. And we've really started to focus quite heavily in kind of this purpose-driven space. So really trying to find people who have a company ethos that's a little bit bigger than just making money. It's about trying to do something else to help the world. So,
Right.
for example, Relish is a 1% for the Planet partner. So 1% of our revenues go back to environmental causes. Just things like that. Nonprofits, B Corps, people like that are the
Right.
are the people that we really like to serve. I found myself working on a nonprofit site it was a Memorial Day weekend. It was gorgeous here. It was 2 o'clock on a Sunday, and they had something that they really needed to get out that following week. And I'm banging away, working for them. And I stopped and I thought, man, I'm not upset about this. And so at that point, I was like, oh, okay, if I could do
Okay.
more work
Yeah.
with people who are making a difference,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like work. And that's really kind of what we're looking to do. I think all of us should be looking to do something like that.
Yeah. Nice. And do your clients tend to come from Colorado, or do you end up all over the place?
We're a little bit all over the place, but I would say that we're 90% focused in state. It's just easier to sell here in the local area. But we have clients running out of Montana and California and New York, and so we certainly have people from all over. We've
Nice.
worked with people all over the globe in the past 12 years or so.
Oh, that's kind of fun. We'll end up talking about email a bunch, but do other channels, social media, mobile, like do those factor in the things that you help those clients with?
Yeah, we primarily focus on kind of the web experience. Obviously, all of those things kind of come into play. So when we talk about kind of this ecosystem, this marketing ecosystem, the hub is really your website, and
Website.
then certainly we can get into the weeds in terms of there are multiple hubs within your website, or there should be, but at the end of the day, you have your site, and then you have your content, which you need a place to put the content. The content's so important. And then the third overlap becomes kind of SEO. And so if you think of the Venn diagram with those three elements, the website actually the content's probably the biggest. The website, is in there because that's super necessary. And then you have the overlap of SEO, which content certainly helps fuel. And then there's all the other stuff around that, which is all really important for driving awareness and driving interactions and engagement. So that can be everything from pay-per-click advertising to social media to emails to in-person events, which we think are part of that ecosystem and part of that support network that starts to drive interest and help build relationships. We kind of look at marketing as relationship building at the end of the day.
Nice. And I would imagine for purpose-driven companies like you described, content's even higher up the stack because there's got to be an emotional and a personal component to why someone's going to connect with them or be a
Yeah,
customer.
one thing about purpose driven, and in our minds, and certainly I think that there can be a variety of ways to interpret that sort of bucket. But in our minds, it's really just people who are trying to do something more than just make money. It's great to want another yacht, but if you can put something else together that helps fuel
Yeah.
your company culture, that tends to be something that you can message against, that really helps drive all the people who are engaged, all the stakeholders. So everybody from your internal team to your vendors to your clients even can get really engaged with those types of activities. And so we encourage companies to do that. We start a lot of our exploration and a lot of our engagements with kind of the idea of value proposition as well as vision, values, and mission. And well, actually starting with values, really what are those things that drive everything that you're doing? The vision then being that long-term kind of play, like what's an aspirational future state you seek your company to create. And then the mission becomes kind of those day-to-day activities and the day-to-day kind of ethos that drives toward that North Star of your vision. And so really any company can be purpose driven if you have some kind of component to it that enables you to do a little bit more than just making a paycheck.
Right. I have a friend, educator, now retired, but when someone starts knocking capitalism, he has this tart response. He's like, well, look, being a drug dealer is a perfectly legitimate capitalist enterprise. So don't lean too heavily on your rationalization. You could go sell that as well. Why are you not doing that if it's more profitable? Surely
Right.
there's another reason to do what you're doing,
Right.
which sounds like the heart of what you're saying. I would think it would also help. That purpose-driven dimension would also help recruit and retain
Mhm.
employees these days.
Yeah, particularly in what we're seeing in some of the trends for employment, particularly as millennials and
Yeah,
Gen
whatever they are,
Z, whatever
the next ones.
the newest people coming out of college are. And you know, I'm just thrilled to death that this is the case, but they are really starting to drive the narrative on both sales and recruitment.
Yeah.
So, you know, people are starting to really vote with their dollar,
Yeah.
and decide where they want to spend their money and where they want to spend their time based upon the values of those businesses that they're contributing to.
Yeah.
And likewise in the workplace, people want to work for companies that have something bigger than just, you know, showing up to work and putting in your 40 hours and going home. And you know, if you can feel like you're part of something bigger than just selling a widget, you know, if that selling that widget means something more than that, then I think that's
like you said,
proving to be beneficial.
About your Sunday, right? It's like you said about your Sunday afternoon. It's like, wait a minute, I'm not cranked by doing this. Like, there's a reason to do it. That's not just demanding client and contract and stuff like that. It's like,
exactly,
a lot easier.
Exactly.
And I agree about the millennials and the generation following. It does seem, I keep reading about various labels, but I keep reading about the great reshuffle, I think is the label. Like the expected, a lot of people are going to go, hang on a second. Why am I doing this job? Why shouldn't I do that instead? You know, I had a year to think about it more than before. So now I might act on it. I might move to Colorado. I might change jobs. I might. It's like, ooh, that's a nice outcome off of a fairly difficult time for everybody.
Yeah, it's really, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of interesting things going on in the marketplace right now.
Yeah.
And it's fun to see. I think for some people it's probably a little scary because they never had to you know, offer up, you know, company culture as a selling point in the past, or it was, you know, do you have a foosball table when I was kind of coming up
in the .com era, right?
In that late 90s zone. You know, it was like, is there free soda, and you know, do you have a foosball table, and you know, that was kind of that company culture. But it's a step in that direction where it's you know, the idea that it's more than just coming to work and doing your time and that being it. And so it's been really interesting. I've been doing this for a while now, so it's been fun to kind of see how things have evolved.
Well, if you said 93, so you read the press about work-life balance, and you must be going, yeah. I've been doing this for a lot longer than just this year, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, I held jobs for a number of years there. So I was working in Boulder when we bought our house up here in the mountains. So commuting down to Boulder every day. Then I've commuted to Denver every day. We used to joke that we're 45 minutes from everywhere. Because at one point we kind of were. You know, I could get to downtown Denver from my house in 45 minutes, which is not a horrible commute.
That bad.
You know, that's pretty average, really. You know, and Boulder was very similar. Boulder's actually a little more predictable, and that's where Relish is located. When we go somewhere, we're located in Boulder now.
Right. Good brand, good for the brand too, right? Boulder is a great association to have.
Yeah, but yeah, the work-life balance. I mean, the thing I think I took to heart was the idea of either live where you work or live where you play. And I chose the where I play. And then now it's where I work too. So there you go.
Yeah, and the infrastructure enabling that is just, it's gotten better and better. I was talking with someone the other day, and I said, you know, we really dodged a bullet with the timing of the pandemic. And they looked askance, and I said, no, you got to understand. I mean, I work with this stuff for a living. 5 years earlier, you would not have seen businesses, schools, and all sorts of ranges of organizations going, I guess we have to adapt. And for the most part, doing it relatively successfully, you know?
Yeah. I was actually talking about this with someone earlier today.
Yeah.
Where if this had happened 10 years ago, who knows what would have happened? It would have been chaos. I mean, it was chaos anyway, but can you imagine, you know, I mean, without the tools that we have, you know, you and I are talking with each other on a podcast here, 1,700 miles apart, and it's working just fine. At least I believe it is. My end's working great. And we wouldn't have been able to do that, you know, 5-10 years ago.
And it was partially bandwidth and the sort of infrastructure pieces of it, partially, tool sets, and also just facility ease, comfort, etc. That I've been a digital adopter. You've been a digital adopter for a long time. Not everybody was and has. I heard one school system say, apropos of the pandemic, we had a 10-year plan for remote education and distance learning, and we implemented it in 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I hope. I'm sure kids are ready to get the heck back in class. I'm not saying let's stay virtual for that particular function, but at least there was a lifeline there. Not necessarily great for everybody, but at least there was
Right.
a lifeline there, and it would have been
Right.
a lot different before. Lateral curveball. I'm intrigued that you're Colorado College liberal arts grad.
I am. Yeah.
You are. How has
Yep.
that? How has that background? I know that I know a reasonably good bit about the school. Terrific institution.
Yeah. I was very fortunate to be able to attend CC back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Oh wow.
Graduated in 1991.
Okay.
So there's how old I am. So CC was really great for me in a lot of respects. The block plan.
Yes.
I'm a very immersive kind of guy. And so having that opportunity, and for those of the audience who aren't familiar with the block plan, you take one class, one specific class for 3.5 weeks.
Yep.
Some of them are longer. For example, organic chemistry or something like that would be a 2-block course. But for the most part, you're taking one course for 3.5 weeks, and then you get a short little break. You get Wednesday afternoon through Sunday off, and then you go back and you take your next class. So instead of having to juggle, 5 or 6 or however many, I don't even know, however many courses that people take at a standard institution, and figuring out how to study for each of those, and you just get this immersive experience. And for me, it was actually quite good. I was a sociology major. And so that has certainly applied to what I do with marketing quite a bit in a lot of ways. And then I was actually in pre-med as well. So the pre-med part, some of those classes were a real challenge. Like I mentioned, organic chemistry, for example, was 2 months of very intensive. You'd go to class at 8, you'd get out of class about noon, you'd have an hour to grab lunch, you'd then you have to go back to lab from about 1 to 4 or so, 1 to 4:30, and then you'd go study. And so, when it was funny because you'd have friends that would just disappear for a while. It was like, oh, they must be in something really horrendous, physics or chem or something.
So did you jump from Gunnison High School to CC?
I did. Yeah.
Wow.
I graduated Gunnison.
So from a more, I'm a Durango High School grad. So like same old, right? Like wonderful small town public schools, but not a block system.
No.
To you must have had classmates from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Serious immersion, terrific faculty
at
CC. That's a real jump up in terms of perspective.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, some of the kids who'd come from boarding school scenarios or really solid prep school scenarios certainly had a leg up on some of us who may not have had that same sort of intensive experience. But yeah, I mean, CC was really good for me. And then I was waiting to get into med school, so I applied to med school and didn't get in my first year, and was working as a salesperson at a bike company, a catalog company, back in the day. And one day the owner asked me out to lunch, and I was like, well, am I getting fired here? That'd be kind of weird to take someone to lunch and fire them, but I had no idea what was going on. And they said, hey, you went to school and you're seem to be pretty sharp. You want to write copy for us? Because they had a catalog. That was their primary source of revenue. And I mean, they had a brick and mortar, but they were primarily catalog sales. And I said, sure, I'll do that. That sounds like fun. So I started writing copy for them. And about 6 weeks later, the graphic artist just stopped showing up to work. She quit. And we had to get a catalog out, and people were kind of like freaking out because they didn't know what to do. And I said, well, I know how to turn on the Mac. I'll do that. And so all of a sudden I found myself kind of thrust into this role
Page
at a
PageMaker,
very early age of,
PageMaker or Quark, one of the two.
it was Quark actually.
Got
Yep. Um,
it.
yep. And I thrust into this role of director of marketing for one of
Yeah.
the top three catalog companies in the nation at that point.
Wow.
So ran that department for a number of years, and then went on to work at agencies, did a whole bunch of .com stuff,
Okay.
all the ups and downs there. And then
Yeah.
at some point I lost my mind and decided I could do this myself. So I started my own business with a partner, and then we rolled, as I said earlier, we rolled that into Relish about a year later.
Yeah.
And so it's been I joke that I haven't been employed for 12 years now, 13
Yeah.
years now. So
how does someone, I always think of marketing as like the outside edge of the bubble in terms of communications and relationships building. Like, how do you stay current? And I don't mean technically current, I mean marketing current. Like, how do you stay in touch?
well, we use a variety of mechanisms. I think that the thing that I have committed myself to doing is just having conversations. And whether or not those conversations lead to anything isn't the point. It's just the point of having them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things I love about the podcast that I started last year. It's called Relish This. Is that I was having those conversations anyway. I was talking with people about their businesses and asking them questions about where they were seeing challenges and how they had overcome them, and things that were working and things that weren't, and surprises and things of that nature all the time. And so flipping that into a podcast just seemed completely natural.
Yeah.
In that, it was just work I was doing on the regular anyway. So I tend to think of it as just, like I think I said earlier, just relationship building, where, if you can facilitate a conversation in some fashion and then be present and be helpful and serve during that conversation, then good things happen. Yeah. And those good things may happen, directly in front of you in terms of filling your pocketbook, or they may happen elsewhere where you've provided some people some good tips and insights, and they can go and kind of roll with it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the first step. And so, the mechanisms that I use to do that, and, back in the day, prior to last year, it was a lot of in-person networking event stuff, really making sure that I was out having those conversations to start to kind of fuel filling up my calendar with other conversations. And now, being remote and virtual, we leverage LinkedIn a lot. Mm-hmm. To just try to prospect and start relationships and start conversations there. Yeah. We do hit, we use our email list a lot in terms of trying to create opportunities for follow-up conversations.
Okay.
And yeah, those are kind of the two big ones. I mean, we're on social. I think, LinkedIn falls into that, mm-hmm. that bucket for sure. But those are kind of the starting points, I think. Gotcha. One of the things that we've been doing with email in particular is getting away from that newsletter idea where people send out, a choose your own adventure newsletter once a month that has 9 different links and, 3 calls to action. And the expectation there is that someone's going to open that when it's clearly a newsletter. Yeah. It's sent from an info @ address or newsletter @ or, something that's not a person. Yeah. It's sent, the subject line is monthly newsletter or something equally, not fantastic. And it's just not taking advantage of a lot of the things that email actually affords in terms of advantage. Email is great because it's something that someone has opted into for the most part. They've raised their hand at some point and said, "Hey, I'm interested in this." Yeah. And so you've automatically elevated that conversation and that relationship to a different level than just, blasting something out on social. So we love that. optimized email in terms of, really looking at subject lines, who it's from, who it's to, leveraging opportunities in that space is super helpful. And then what we've been doing, and this was my main point, was getting back to this idea that you can actually just send out your blog, your post in an email, as opposed to forcing someone to come back to your site. You can have that conversation. You can create that back and forth exchange within this mechanism that people are using, and also you can have a very pointed. You have a single point that's a blog post or whatever it is. You're not just allowing people to choose whatever piece of this thing they thought was interesting.
Yeah.
So you can have a little bit of control over that as well. And then in the nonprofit space, the boomer generation continues to be the most philanthropic in terms of donations and money, and that generation is still very heavily steeped in email. So I would say for any people out there who are in the nonprofit space, that not to ignore email, because a lot of your potential donor base is probably on that platform a lot.
Yeah, and it's the link that you actually can maintain control over, right? Facebook can't yank that audience out from under you.
And think if all of your eggs were in the MySpace bucket. I mean, you don't have control over these other platforms. Anything could happen. And I think Facebook is starting to see that a little bit in terms of backlash.
Really too.
Where there are a lot of people who either were on it, who decided that they don't want to be, and it's still the elephant in the room. I mean, they have a huge chunk of the population in their system in some fashion, but you don't have any control over that.
Okay. Yeah, so you really don't. Back to your newsletter description. I'm gonna guess you also, at least for some clients or for yourselves, advocate the shift to stop sort of talking in third person and go ahead and be direct and personal, even though you may be sending it to 1,000 people.
Yeah, I don't think it's disingenuous to approach email from the perspective that this is a one-to-one conversation.
Right.
And even if you're sending this to 500 people or 1,000 people, you're still wanting to connect with each of those people.
Right.
And so crafting your email and making it tailored to where it is a one-to-one. It is, it is that feel. And you're not trying to spoof that. You're really, if you come at it from the perspective of we're trying to provide value, and just approach it from that, then I think you're in a pretty good starting place in terms of where you're going. And so if I'm sending a bunch of emails that I think it's going to be valuable to those people, so that's the first step. And then tailoring that message, working in use and working in names whenever you can. But thinking about it, so starting from the perspective of this is an email to you as a person, as opposed to how can I send an email to a whole bunch of people? I think that if you can just put yourself in that space and in that mindset, I think that is really helpful.
Change the authorial intention, or whatever the phrase is. I had a friend of mine, April Mullen from Spark Post, on early on when we started this podcast, and April and I I think that was the conversation. We ended up talking about this surprise rise of paid email newsletters within the last couple of years. Substack being the prominent one. I think Twitter just bought a company that's in sort of a similar space. It was like, that is a surprise. Why is that? And I mean, we're both speculating, but that, Own the Connection was certainly part of it. The success of actually getting that first person communication and not having to jump through extra hoops and clicks to get to it and read it makes a ton of sense as well. You're kind of managing your paywall with the send, if you in a Substack kind of scenario. And any other thoughts to that on that space?
I was just reading an article about this the other day, and it is fascinating. I think that the word newsletter is being used a slightly differently in
Agreed.
this context, where what they've done, and the name that pops to mind is Matt Talby. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but he's a well-known author, a writer from, I believe he was with Rolling Stone perhaps back in the day.
And he just signed on with Substack, big, like
Yeah.
they bone, like they cut a business deal to basically say, come hang out your own shingle, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And I think that some of that is in response to the perceived or experienced crackdown on the platforms that they were using effectively. So for example, if somebody gets banned from Twitter,
Yeah.
and that was their platform, then what happens, right? And
Right.
so I think that was part of the deal. And then I don't know that these are actually have that same sort of newsletter connotation. I think that they're very similar. I don't subscribe to one, so I'm sort of guessing here, but
Yeah.
I'm guessing that they're a single topic of discussion
Mm.
when they get sent. At least that's how it sounds to me, as opposed to creating what I think most people think of as a newsletter that has, here's an excerpt of the latest blog post, and here's some news that happened to in the last 3 months, and here's
Yeah.
perhaps a resource that you might be interested in. That's just this mishmash of stuff.
Mismatches.
But again, I'm sort of making some guesses here, but I do think that you're spot on in terms of the ownership of the platform, so to speak. I mean, email is a little bit platform agnostic, where if you're on Facebook, you're on Facebook, and if you're on Twitter,
Right.
there's not a lot of other options there. That's a channel.
There's a gentleman who lives up here in the Northwest, and actually, like we've been friends for a good decade plus. A fellow named Mark Anderson, and he has put out an email newsletter called Strategic News Service. For, I think Mark's going on 30 years at this,
That's awesome.
and it was a paid email newsletter way back when. And I mean, he's definitely one of the smartest people I've ever had a chance to be in a room with. And when you read Strategic News, it's like Mark sat down and wrote this. It was not a staff. It was not, let's outsource this. It's like, this is what Mark thinks about this issue. And
Mm-hmm.
ends up his issues are less frequent. The other newsletter that I've subscribed to for a good number of years now that helped me watch this space evolve in the last couple is Ben Thompson's Stratechery. So I
Mm-hmm.
pony up my $10 a month for Stratechery happily, and I pounce on it every morning to read it. But it feels like, and it is, Ben's like, okay, you saw the Apple headline about blah blah blah. Let me put it through my lens. Here's what I think. I may be wrong. Here's past references. And 3 days later, he may say, oh, yeah, when I said, it was pink, you know what? Dumb call on my part because I didn't know this, or now I understand
Right.
that. It's like, it's got a very one-to-one, not a newsletter feel. It feels more like a journal in public, if you will.
Right. Now, I think that's the approach that we recommend in terms of what are you sending out, and certainly you need to send out something every once in a while that speaks to news, and something that asks for a purchase or an engagement or a next step type of deal. However, just being sensitive and thoughtful to how you do that, I think, is what really makes the difference between something that's going to get opened on the regular and something that just maybe they don't unsubscribe, but they're certainly not participating with.
Yeah, and even if they don't read it, I hate to use the word authenticity because it gets beat up a lot, but I occasionally will skip a Stratechery issue, but it's not, oh, I'm mad at that guy, I'm going to unsubscribe. It's like, I just didn't have time to read that right now. I will probably go back and do it later, but I sort of trust it. If I go do it later, it's going to be smart, authentic, informed, and all of that other stuff. So the fact that it's sitting there in the inbox, he won, even if I didn't happen to read it today. Like, from a business perspective, still a win for him. Yeah.
Well, there's a consistency component to that too, and that's one of the things that we find people either bite off too much, and then freak out and don't do anything.
Yep.
So I think, setting smart goals early on is really important.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, it can be a little bit of a stretch, or it can be a little uncomfortable, but if it's really uncomfortable, our tendency as humans is to do nothing as opposed to doing a little bit, because both of those feel like fails, right?
Slink
It's
away
like
and
if I
hope
say
nobody.
I'm going to send out one a day and I can't do that,
Yeah.
I've failed.
Yeah.
Even if I send out 4 a week, right?
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I've failed, and so I might as well do none, because it still gets into the L column in terms of wins losses.
Yeah.
And so really, when you come at that first initial, like, I think I want to do this, just setting your commitment to something that, again, maybe a stretch, but isn't going to break you. And then once you get good at that, so if you say I'm going to do 1 a month and you're nailing it, then you can do 2 a month.
Right.
And that can be your next commitment. And so there's a few other things in terms of consistency and cadence. Is people get used to that, and and so then they start to expect it, not in a bad way, in a they're looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Or even, like you said, if maybe you skip a couple, it's still there, and so it's still demonstrating that you're around and you're there to help, and you're engaged and you're thinking about these things, and that, like you said, is just another win.
Yeah.
So I think with anything we do, making sure that we set appropriate commitments that are reasonable is a good thing to take into account.
Yeah. That you'd think the difference between blogging and the kind of email, newsletter that we're talking about here, it isn't big. But I remember when blogging was big, and like everyone and their dog jumped on writing a blog, and so many of them felt forced, and I've got to make up stuff to talk about. And with a blog, you don't know who's going to read it.
Right.
With email, you got like, okay, this set of people said, yes, I do want to get that. And that's a very different starter for the relationship than random guy who happens to run across me in a web search and read that one blog post.
Yeah, exactly. I think that so one of the other things I love about email, as well as taking materials and finding out ways to kind of repurpose those materials. So creating that content is, so I'll just mention LinkedIn to start. So one of the things that we noticed was my reach on LinkedIn was a lot higher than the web traffic that we were getting. And that started, this was back in the day, and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. So I started thinking, well, why don't I make sure that I publish to LinkedIn at least as frequently as I publish on my site, because that's where the people are. So instead of expecting people to come to you all the time, you just go to where they are. And similarly, email has the same kind of capacity. If you have 1,000-person email list, you might not have, you may, but you may not have 1,000 actually interested people coming to your site.
Right.
You might get plenty more clicks than that on any given day, but a lot of that is, just kind of organic junk traffic, which is still, these are not bad things, but ultimately, if you have 1,000 people who raised their hand and said, yeah, I want this, then you're going to them, and you're giving this to them where they are already participating. So it makes sense to leverage it as an opportunity for sure.
Yeah. I talked with one gent at a fairly sizable nonprofit, Operation Smile, if I recall correctly. Like they help correct smiles all over the world. And he was telling me how methodical they are about, he used the word curating the stories that come up through their work. Like that really became their marketing asset. And it wasn't a cynical thing. It was like, we need to communicate the difference this is making, whether it's a photograph or a video or a written story. Like we need to get that in people's hands, because really that's a great deal about why they donated, supported, whatever, in the first place, it wasn't just to have a tax write-off. It was, I can help change a kid's life, and seeing
Yeah.
that happen
Yeah.
is a heck of a thing. Like,
Yeah.
it's interesting
That
the way
comes,
the whole
yeah,
organization.
that comes back to that whole, persona exercise, and really understanding why people are interested in what you're saying or what
Yeah,
you provide.
yeah,
And, most of the time it's not what, doesn't have anything to do with what we do. It's how we make their life better. Um,
yeah,
and,
yeah,
ultimately, you know, if that, if making their life better was just me figuring out a couple things that were causing them challenges and going over and, washing their car or walking their dog or whatever, and
hmm,
that made their life better, then, then that's great. That,
right,
they, certainly we need to differentiate and establish what things we're best at and do
yeah,
those things. But no one really cares how we get it done a lot of the time.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's a fair observation. Do you have? I won't phrase it as a question because it'd be BS. I find myself wondering about our load capacity in this content economy. It's like there are way too many things that I could read, and I just couldn't possibly get to all of them. And
Hmm.
the selection criteria is often pretty flippin' arbitrary. Like, I ran
Hmm.
across this or I liked that, so I stuck with it. And there's 52 others that'd be maybe more useful, and I just don't know about them. And even discovering the good stuff is a whole lot of work and time.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah, it really is.
how do you get how do you get your signal above the noise for the people for whom it's going to speak? Or
Well, I think that might come down in a lot of respects to not trying to appeal to everybody. And, um, again, I think from a psychological or sociological standpoint, we all like to be liked. Um,
yeah,
but sometimes we have to just pick a lane and decide this is what we're going to talk about. And really there is an audience for pretty much everything. And that audience may be very, very small,
mhm,
but if you can inspire and educate and bring value to that even very small audience,
mhm.
you'll be the person that they go to for information, etc.
Good way to look at
If you've satisfied that itch. And
it.
it comes back to a so a lot of people think we need an app, right? And or I need an app, or I have this great idea for an app.
Yeah,
And our our inclination is to just rush out and build it and then expect people to show up and buy it, which sometimes certainly happens. I mean, that does happen. However, if you can build a rabid fan base before you go out and build the app,
right.
you're going to save yourself a lot of money, because you have this group of people that are automatically going to purchase this thing when it arrives.
Yeah.
And so similarly, I think that we can kind of take that same approach in terms of just really focusing on a specific niche, really getting great at satisfying the challenges of that niche in terms of just the materials that we put out. And then and then that becomes this thing that can grow, and it can grow from it's a lot easier to grow something that's specific than a general thing.
Yeah.
And again, there are plenty of examples of general things that have grown quite large, but if you can, if to try and get through all that clutter and to try and rise above all that churn, I think that specialization is part of that,
Yeah.
component.
Yeah. Niche down, niche down, niche down. Someone said the other day, like, yeah, you're probably right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. Yeah, we live in such a wealth of information access, and it's easy to lose sight of that in sort of dog paddling through it. And just go, wait a minute, hang on a second. Like, you have like the world's library at your fingertips. Tell me
Yeah.
how this is not a good thing. This is a good thing. It means you have to sit down and read some of it, and you can't
Right.
be all of it, and that's okay.
Right.
But wow, right? What a fantastic time. Was it Louis C.K.? Everything's amazing and nobody's happy. He said, like, he's right.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just
Yeah, we live in a really interesting age in terms of that stuff. And the fact that we're carrying around, a supercomputer, and everybody it changes a lot of things. And there's a lot more competition. And that's where I think if you just stay consistent and you focus on providing value, and you understand the challenges that the people that you are hoping to appeal to have,
Mhm.
and providing information and assistance and empathy, in that space, I think that you end up with at least a very engaged group of people who
Right.
care very much about your success and supporting you.
Yeah, you've got them, willing to have further conversation, which is
Yeah.
a much better footing to start on than, "Hey, let me interrupt you and see if you'll marry me."
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. I think that we fail. So in the age of social media, we all are inundated with success stories all the time,
Yes.
and everything seems so easy because we're only seeing the successes, and
Yeah.
we aren't seeing the 99 failures that contributed to that one success. And so, as marketers, we have to. It would behoove us to keep in the back of our minds the fact that, let's say, 97% of the people that you reach out to in any given day are not ready, not interested in what you're trying to provide for them.
Right, right.
But three of them were. If
Yeah,
you reach out to 100 people, three people were. And
yeah,
the next day, it's going to be three different people, or maybe it's the next week. But at some point, there's a natural churn on these activities, and if we can keep in the back of our heads how that's just the game,
yeah,
and understanding that we're going to hear a lot of no's,
yeah,
but some percentage of those no's are actually maybes, and some percentage of those no's are no's today, but they'll be maybes tomorrow,
yeah.
and the maybes will shift to yeses, and just keep at it, and just keep churning, and keep providing good, valuable information. I think that people come around, and that's just how it has to work. And then you just keep putting people in at the top, and they could be no's or maybes or even yeses at the start, but
Yeah.
expecting the expectation that you're going to make 10 phone calls, and nine of those are going to
Yeah.
be sales is
Yeah.
is not, a, a, a good expectation to set for oneself.
Yeah, it's
um,
kind of like don't say I'm going to write a blog post or a newsletter every day because really you're not.
yeah, and then just remember that everything we're reading out there is edited
Yeah,
and curated and polished.
and
So
algorithmically selected and filtered and
that too, yeah.
nuanced and everything. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but most people don't go on social media to talk about the 87 phone calls they made this week that they got hung up on.
yeah, yeah,
They're talking about the 13 that they made that were sales or big wins or whatever. And so just coming at it from that perspective of this is hard. It's
yeah,
hard,
yeah,
and it's okay that it's hard, but you know don't set yourself up to think that you're going to win the first race that you enter.
yeah, yeah. Wow, good advice. Well, I love when a conversation wanders like this, and the kind of sage, like right on the mark stuff that you've had to say. Like, I hope some people listen to this conversation because I think
Too.
there's some real valuable perspective there.
Well, I've had a really fun time talking with you today, and
Yeah,
it's
likewise.
great to connect with a fellow southwestern Colorado fella.
Tell you, not many people from our little corner of the world. You say Gunnison, and I've got like vivid picture and more than a few high school misadventures, I think, associated with that town. A beautiful part of the country.
Yeah, it is.
Have you stayed in Colorado the whole time? Lifelike?
Well, we moved to Gunnison when I was in early part of high school.
Okay.
So I finished up high school,
Okay. Yeah.
grew up in Oklahoma City, and I've been back. Let's see, we left in '85. I think I've been back 4 times.
Okay.
So I didn't really miss it too much.
Yeah. Okay. I
Um,
got that.
there are lots of lovely people in Oklahoma City, but I prefer to live here in the state. And then when I was going to college, I was looking at a few different schools and decided I really wanted to stay in state.
Yeah.
Just because I just pretty much had just gotten here and wasn't ready to leave.
Yeah.
And have been here ever since.
Yeah. Well, why would you leave Colorado? I mean, come on, it's Colorado.
Well, the Seattle area is gorgeous as well. I had the privilege of climbing Rainier.
Did you?
A couple of years ago. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Nice.
And it's just a gorgeous area. And then my wife is from the Corvallis, Oregon area.
That's nice as well. My older son summited Baker, which is close to us. Like, go ahead. I don't do heights, so you can go ahead and climb the mountain. But I get the appeal. And yeah, this corner of the country is the only place I could have settled aside from home state there. My wife likes the Northwest, so here we are. Many
nice. Well, it's a good place to be. I always enjoy visiting.
Yeah, especially in the summer. In winter, after sunny Southern Colorado. Well, cool. Thank you, Stu. What a delightful conversation.
Oh, I had such a good time, and I really hope you have a good rest of your week, Matthew, and I will talk to you real soon.
Deal. My guest again has been Stu Swineford, co-founder and CMO at Relish Studio. Where does someone find you online, Stu?
They can find us at relishstudio.com. So it's like relish, like pickle relish, and studio.com. If you are looking to listen to a podcast, it's Relish This. So you can find that anywhere that you go to listen to podcasts. And I'm myself am on LinkedIn, just search for Stu, S-T-U, Swineford, S-W-I-N-E-F-O-R-D, and love to connect with people there as well.
We'll do that. I'm going to cut the recording. Thanks again.